In today's episode, we go well beyond coffee enemas when it comes to what is necessary to truly detox and cleanse our lives. Join author and international teacher Guy Needler as he shares with us what it really means to purify our lives, how to avoid karma, the benefits to traversing the frequencies, and the 6 major pathways to progress in our lives and create a great civilization. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our show. Today, we are going to take detox to the next level. So we're going to go well beyond what we normally talk about in just the physical. And we brought on a special guest named Guy Needler. And we came across Guy's work through a good friend of ours, RJ Spina, who we've had on the show many times. And Tay and I have really appreciated all of RJ's work. And when he recommended that we check out Guy Needler's work, we jumped in with both feet. And Guy has written a number of different books, including The History of God, Beyond the Source, Avoiding Karma, and Psycho-Spiritual Healing. And so we wanted to bring him on and get his perspective around when we talk about detox, what does that mean from a larger, grander view of what we mean to detoxify? What does it mean to really purify our bodies? And so Guy takes us to the next level. He talks a lot about traversing the frequencies, and he gets into a lot of detail around his experience because he's tapped into a greater access to information than most people are able to access at this point in time. And so he's got some really neat perspectives on this. Now, the first 20 minutes or so, he really explains how he came to where he is, his history, some of the experiences that he's had that brought him to the point of even being able to write these books. And then we go into some really specific questions. I wanted to know too, he wrote a book specifically on karma, which is really a very amazing book. I really enjoyed it a lot. I wanted to understand more like, how do we avoid karma? Because I think of that as even detoxifying. How do we take less with us? How do we accrue less karma throughout our lives? What are the strategies? What are some of the ways to live our lives to be able to do this? He breaks some of that down. He specifically talks about 6 major pathways that we can use to progress in our lives and to ultimately create a great civilization. These are really beautiful. And this is sort of towards the end of the conversation where he dives into that and breaks each one of these 6 major pathways down. I think this episode is really beautiful. I think there's so many pieces of wisdom. He gets into even around diet and some of the beginnings of what people really need to look at when we are using a diet as far as detoxifying and cleansing our body, and what essentially is just required. When we're talking about even eating animal products, if people eat animal products, what is the best practice to do that? And how can you start to incorporate that into your life? So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We really enjoyed talking to Guy, and I look forward to having him back again in the future. We might even see if we can create a round table maybe one day with him and RJ. I'd love to hear the two of them passing some ideas back and forth and dialoguing. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode, and thanks so much for listening to our content. Thank you very much for paying attention to this material. I think anything that we create, anything that Tay and I create, any guests that we bring on to interview, it's because we really do think they've got something very valuable to share that I know has impacted our life or has helped us navigate our life in a more conscious way. And we're hoping that it does the same for you. So help us get this information out. Please share, subscribe, like, pass it along to friends that you think would benefit from this information. And if you haven't made it to Apple iTunes, please go on and leave us a 5-star review and a comment. Those really help with the algorithms and help us be able to access this information to more people. So thank you very much, and I hope you guys enjoy the episode. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And today we are bringing in Guy Needler. And we've been excited to talk to Guy for the last few weeks. Guy is the author of several books, including The History of God, Beyond the Source, Avoiding Karma, and Psycho-Spiritual Healing. Guy lectures and holds worldwide workshops teaching techniques necessary to traverse the frequencies. He was initially trained as a mechanical engineer and later became a chartered electronics engineer. However, he was always aware of the worlds of spirit. He discovered via meditation that he was able to traverse the frequencies above those of the human aura and communicate and gain insights from higher energetic entities. We came across Guy's work through another beloved guest of ours and good friend, RJ Spina. And after Tay and I had a chance to go through a bunch of Guy's work, we felt that you would be the perfect person to come on to help us navigate and learn a little bit more about the metaphysical realms and the spiritual aspect of detoxification. I often talk to people about the different bodies of health. So we talk about the physical and the vital and the emotional and mental and spiritual and all these different areas. Because a lot of times when we get into talking about detoxification, it's all around colon cleansing and supplements. And I mean, you can only talk about coffee enemas so much before you need to start to break it into some different areas. Yeah. So, Guy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you, and it's always an honor to be able to speak and talk about all sorts of subjects surrounding the greater reality.
Wonderful. So maybe we can start. Can you share a little bit of your story? Because I know you've got a pretty diverse background. I mean, 2 master's degrees and engineering, and going from that into traversing the frequencies. You know, how did that all sort of blend together?
Well, basically, a long time ago, when I was a teenager, I used to meditate. I used to know that there was much more out there. And in fact, I can remember sort of meditating in my bedroom as probably at 12 or 13, and actually seeing the wind go up between the 2 houses. There was my parents' house and my next door neighbour's house, up the roof and across and around the chimney. I remember saying to my mother, "Mum, I can see the wind." And she said, "Don't be so stupid. Nobody can see the wind." But it's a sort of comment that would sort of cut you down totally, and make you think you've just basically invented it or created something, or just thought you'd seen something but you actually hadn't. And then sort of later on, I got in contact by accident, because I was moved from one work location to another, with a gentleman who had some books by an author called Lobsang Rampa. I don't know if you know the author. He's disincarnate now, but he was basically a walk-in from a Tibetan Lama, and the body he was walking, that soul walked into, was basically a plumber in the States. But he'd actually had a body originally, but the body was so damaged as a result of some horrific experiences in the Second World War that it seemed more natural to move into a different body, specifically as a soul in that body didn't want to be incarnate anymore. So it was a good swap over. And he wrote a book called You Forever. And that book was basically, although it was originally supposed to be a correspondence course for teaching meditation, astral traveling, and those sorts of things, psychometry, ended up being just a book to illustrate how to do it. And I learned from that how to meditate properly and how to do astral traveling and psychometry. When I was meditating one morning, I had for want of a better word, a visitation by 4 quite large robed individuals that had a sort of a humanoid image to them, but was a little bit disfocused. And they told me what I was researching into, what I was doing was right. The information was right, but it wasn't the right time, because I needed to experience more earthly things before I could move on. So from that, but these characters, these entities, they sort of animated love. It was like an instant communication. There was no words involved. It was just a knowingness, like a clairsentience, if you want to call it that. And it was an amazing feeling. I can still remember it now. Literally nearly 50 years later. So it was quite a remarkable experience, and they changed me instantaneously, because from that point onwards, I didn't really have the same motivation to meditate, and I became the average individual. I tried to do best as good as I could do at work. I changed my academic qualifications by going to night school to get the postgraduate work and then the master's degrees, and I eventually went and got a chartered engineer at the Institute of Electrical Electronics Engineers in Savoy Row, London, for all those things. Lots of hard work involved, but I became very sort of materialistic in terms of those things, status, material wealth, wanting a nice house. And it was only later, when I think I was just finishing my second master's degree, when I was invited by a friend to go to a Reiki share night, which I refused. I thought, no, I'm not interested in that. 6 months of giving me a lot of hassle later, my wife said, "Well, you should go." So I went, because Anne was quite spiritual, and 12 months later, I was a Reiki master. It sort of went there, liked it, and it clicked. And I met another person in the MBA course as well, who was also interested in Reiki, and so we both continued to know each other after being at university. In fact, we ended up working in the same company as well. Fast forward a little bit, he moved to work in Sweden for a car company called Saab, and we decided to go over there to visit him. Now, what I didn't realize was another mutual friend, who was another Reiki master, had told him that there was something important going to happen when I was over there. There was going to be some activation or something, and that he needed to take me to a certain location. I was totally oblivious to this, and so we went. The second day we were there, we went for a walk, and we went down through what's the railway museum with some wonderful old engines, down this pathway in the countryside, down to a river. And as we were walking down this pathway, I started to feel my hands tingling, quite markedly, not just a, clothes rubbing against your hand. It was quite marked. And then carried on walking down this path to where the path was on the bottom by the side of the river. It was getting stronger and stronger, to the point where my whole body was tingling. And I felt a sudden need to stop and meditate. And there was a rock just off the shore, about a meter. You could jump the meter onto this rock, and you got this little islandlet. And I just thought, that's ideal because it's isolated. So I went on there to meditate. And my wife and my friend said, "Oh, we'll meet you at that suspension bridge," because there's about a kilometre away there was a pedestrian suspension bridge. And what I didn't realise was that I wasn't going to get there, and they're going to have to come back, because what happened was I had the most amazing attunement or download that I've ever experienced in my whole life. And when it finished, I was completely stunned. I couldn't put words together. It was actually amazing. But my wife, who was also quite sensitive, and my friend, who was also sensitive, of course, for doing the Reiki, etc., they both said that they felt there was like a craft or some entities or some energy above me that was linking in with me and rewiring me for things I was going to do in the future. And that's what they told me when they came back. Well, as they were coming back anyway, I sort of came out of the meditation, and I looked across the river. Now, it was a dead calm day. There was no wind at all. And the whole river was like a mill pond. It was like glass, apart from one area. And this one area was lots of choppy water. And behind the choppy water was an area of woodland, pine trees and things. And they were moving around like this. And it was quite marked, the movement. So it wasn't a case of they were moving with wind, they were moving with something else. And the area on the water was also being disturbed, but everything else was calm. The trees weren't moving. So when I started to look and started to focus, I started to feel this area here, being quite painful. I started to see what appeared to be craft, a mixture of mechanical and biological craft hovering there. And this movement of the trees and the water was a little bit like the downwash of a helicopter's rotor, just pushes everything out of the way. And as I started to concentrate on this and see more and more clearly, I had a booming voice in my head say, "Stop it! You're going to ruin what we've just done. We've just done a lot of work on you. Don't force it. Let it start to happen. Whatever's going to happen naturally." And I thought, oh, and then they disappeared. And then this time, my wife Anne and my friend came down, and they described what they'd experienced. And we decided we were going to go back to his place. And we all wrote down what we'd experienced. In fact, we typed it up on his computer, what we experienced, and just saved it. Around this time as well, I was struggling on the end of this one master's degree, which was very heavy on maths. And I was going to a homeopathic to help me. And this homeopathic was a first generation student of Barbara Brennan in the States. I don't know if you know Barbara. She's still there. I don't think she's teaching now. She's got quite a large group of individuals who do the teaching for her. But he was basically helping me to get my confidence back and not get stressed out with things I didn't know about, because the maths involved wasn't invented when I was at school. So I was having to understand the concept and learn how to do it and then do it. Whereas the other students were just doing it, which is really annoying because they're about 21. and so I was really sort of stressed out with this. So the homeopathics were calming me down. And he was giving me energy healing as well, the Brennan healing science. He left suddenly, and all of a sudden another lady came on board. And what I didn't realize then, what she told me was they were both on the same course together. She lived in Bermuda, a lady called Helen, and so the chap lived in the UK, but she started to come back into the UK. And so she continued the healing process, and I eventually got through the master's degree okay. During the end of the master's degree, though, she said, well, I'm going to try to teach people what I've been taught by Barbara. I'm doing basically a suckage and sea weekend. Are you interested? It's in Malvern, which is not too far from Worcestershire. From Worcester, actually, not Worcester. It's in Worcestershire. So I said, yes, okay, I'll go. And a bit like the Reiki, I ended up signing up for a 4-year commitment, which was a long commitment with lots of hard work. It was probably significantly harder than the master's degrees I've done. And I popped out the other side later on as having this healing qualification that was exactly the same as she was taught by Barbara. But during it, I noticed that, or she noticed that I was going different locations above and beyond where we were supposed to go to affect the healing on the different energy templates that create the gross physical and spiritual physical or astral bodies associated with our incarnate vehicle, and that I should control myself more. Well, I hadn't got a clue what she was talking about, of course. So I just carried on. And then some of the other students were there because we used to sort of heal each other and etc. So when I was healing them, they were saying that we were, I don't know where I was going, but I don't like it. They were getting quite stressed out with it. So I decided that the best thing I could do was to, in effect, do what I could do to control where I was going by trying to create a structure around what I was doing above and beyond what I was being taught. And initially, it took ages. It took like 30 minutes to get to a certain level, and about 10 minutes there, and then 30 minutes back down again. And I'd be trying to do this before I went to work in the morning because by then Anne was quite ill. She got a brain tumor, which was going to eventually end her incarnation sort of 10 years later. But I was working with it and trying to understand what was going on with this meditation technique I was creating, this structured way of going to different levels, because I found out I was going to different levels above the frequencies associated with the construct that is the human body, and is also used to create other bodies around in different planets, different locations, different galaxies in the universe. Over a period of time, I got better and better and better at it, and then faster and faster and faster, to the point where now I can just go there. And this is quite a common thing with people. It certainly is with Hindu yogis. But what I found is I was able to communicate with other entities on different frequency levels, and these frequency levels over a certain frequency put us into different dimensions, full dimensions. And within these full dimensions, there was a group of frequency levels within components of dimensions, smaller components, and that each of these was a universal environment. So they were occupied by different disincarnate entities. And I then found out that these disincarnate entities were part of a much bigger entity. And that bigger entity was what I was told to call the source. And I eventually communicated with that. And this source is what we call God, basically. It's what we're part of. We're all part of a much larger entity. We're like the quarks, or even lower than that, in another sort of physical. But if you think of your own body as being the physical, and then you get down to like the quark level, or even lower than that, that's sort of where we are in comparison to this other entity. So I started to communicate with that when I got to a certain level and go further and further and higher. And I eventually found out there was another entity beyond that, a much bigger entity that classified itself as the origin, and that the source entity and other source entities were created by it to help it evolve. And they were given the task of evolving in their own way by creating whatever they needed to do to create that evolutionary opportunity. And that our source entity had created a condition where it had isolated about half of itself, the structure that's associated with the energetic structure that's associated with it, and then populate it with individualized, much significantly smaller units of sentience and energy, so they could experience what this structure could do. And this structure is quite malleable. It's quite, we can create whatever we want to, and where we are now is part of that creation. And so we evolve by experiencing the most minute detail of our creator, because it can't. It's a bit like us using a telescope to see what an electron microscope can do. You know, it's impossible. So you have to have something that's just capable of going smaller to experience the finitude. Whereas if you have something you want to experience the magnitude, then you can use something else. You can observe it yourself. So I found out that everything was to do with evolving, and everything that I was talking to these other entities about was about evolving and about understanding who and what we are. And I started to get lots of information, and I was given a tool of ultimate memory retention for this stuff, not everything else, but just this stuff. And which sometimes frustrates my partner right now. You can remember this stuff, but you can't remember everything else. What's going on? Okay, which is fair enough. And I just typed it down in my lunch break. And over the years, I created quite a lot of stuff, and I started to categorize it and put it all together. So it wasn't all in the same space at the same time. It was all, I got a subject matter which might know about in 1 week, and it might take another 6 months before there's some more information on that subject matter would come along. And eventually I got this sort of 300 or 400 pages of A4, and I thought, because at the time I was reading things like Eckhart Tolle, I was reading Neil Donald Walsh, I was reading all sorts of stuff, and I thought, there's nobody else got this information. They're all doing this and they're doing that, and etc., 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 but there's nobody else got this information. So I decided to create a manuscript and submit it to about 6 different publishers, which either ignored me or told me they weren't interested. And then, although I got one opportunity to do some what do you call personal publishing, self-publishing, which I did initially, because that was the only route forward at first. I was just about to finish that when Dolores Cannon's publishing company, Ozark, got in contact with me and said, we'd like to publish the history of God, please. And yes, you can still publish. You can publish in 2 locations because it's your rights. With self-publishing, you maintain your own rights, whereas you basically give your rights to publish to a publisher. So it was published in 2 directions. One was the first one was had basically about 2/3 of the content of what the Ozark one was, because when I was given the publishing contract, I said, oh, right, I've got a prequel to this book, because it was all the stuff I didn't put into it. And so I created this other manuscript, which was about, ended up being about 175 pages, 200 pages. And Dolores said, no, you can't do that. You've got to integrate it into the first book. So it delayed it by 9 months because we were just putting it together. And so that ended up being the first book, The History of God, issued by Ozark. But the real first book was The History of God, self-published by Athena, which doesn't exist anymore, by the way. It went out of business literally when Ozark took on board the other stuff. And it's now, I think it's printed on demand by Amazon, but it's only got 2/3 of the content of the Ozark book. So that's the story, and everything else is followed from that, and including doing the workshops. I was pestered by a friend of my late wife to teach her how to traverse the frequencies. So we ended up doing a workshop for a day in Glastonbury, and then it grew, and we do more and more. We've been all over the world, and although with COVID it slowed down a lot, I'm doing it now mostly in China, and most of my correspondence courses which I've created as well. And the healing side of it, well, eventually I ended up writing a book about the healing side, psycho-spiritual healing, which incorporates a chunk of the work that I was taught, which is basically Brennan healing science. So I'll put a lot of emphasis on it, saying where it's come from, saying it's come from Barbara, those sorts of things, and pointing the direction towards her books. But the rest of it is what I've been given by source to provide bespoke healing for different patients as they've come along, and they have them fitted into certain pigeonhole slots. And eventually I found out that those bespoke healings actually became slightly more generalized for other people as well. So I started to write those down, what they were. That's what the book was, which is quite interesting because my my agent in China, Leo, hassled me for years to say, you should teach us healing. You should teach us your healing, because we have to do lots of consultations. And I still do consultations over WeChat, which is their version of WhatsApp, and also Voom, which is their version of the Zoom. So, and when he saw this book, I said, because he was going to publish the books, and he looked at it and said, I can't publish this. I said, why not, Leo? He said, people will take it and just do it. It would be ungoverned. It wouldn't have structure. We need to teach it to them rather than give them the book. So after I came back from a workshop in China, I ended up writing the outline for it on the flight back, and created the content for the workshop. And now we're teaching it this year. We're teaching it for the first time, and we've got Western students as well. And it's obviously little modifications as we go along, because that's normal. But it's really successful. And the idea is that it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You could, because Leo's got the technology to do it. Anybody can start, and do the correspondence course and do the video-based work as well. Because obviously I'm on the video for a week at a time sometimes, and at the end of it, they can do the advanced version, which means we all go to China, which is brilliant. At the moment, we can't go to China because nobody's been allowed in, but we're hoping that by the end of the year it'll happen, and we can go there and do the final course, which is the most advanced part of it, which makes it completely unique in terms of healing modality. And that's it, in a nutshell, and probably in 20 minutes rather than 10 minutes.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, that was a good synopsis, I think, Guy. I mean, lots of stuff you had to summarize with all of that. So,
yeah, I mean, you covered so much ground. Even this is actually the first book of yours that I ended up ordering.
Oh wow! Wow.
And then
I
Jason
was reading that
one, and then RJ recommended this one.
Yeah.
And there's so much. I mean, this is just turning my world upside down, and you described it so articulately and beautifully that it definitely captured the essence of what you go into in a lot of detail in this book. And even event space and the significance of that. I mean, it's there's a lot to process for humanity.
Well, you should read the curators as well.
Okay.
If you want your mind bent like a pretzel, that's another one, because that follows on basically. That shows, although it focuses on the source, it's really about the entities that it's created to maintain the evolutionary efficiency of the multiverse. So it's coming back to the source. Although there's a book I've just finished called The Om, which is about another group of entities which are quite rare, which were created or uncreated, I should say, as a function of the origin creating the source entities. And then the book I'm about to start next week, yippee, it's about time I started it actually, is called Beyond the Origin, which actually isn't beyond the origin, but it's following on from a level of information that came out in the Origin Speaks, and also came out in the Beyond the Source book too. So it's carrying on from that, but going beyond the level of knowledge about the origin that we currently know. And I'm being primed already that a lot of it's going to be given to me as a result of accessing different event spaces, not this particular event space, but allowing me to go into, because everything happens concurrently, allow me to go into a space that is observing what's happened, even though it hasn't happened yet. You could call it time travel, but time doesn't exist. So it's event-space travel. So that's going to happen. So I don't know how big that book will be. I'll be happy if it's 150 pages, to be honest, but we'll see, because all these things just grow. The one on the arm just grew, and I didn't expect that to be 300 pages a day for. So we'll see.
I look forward to seeing that one too. Guy, tying things into the concept of cleansing and detox from this other level, you had mentioned the frequencies, and you've talked a lot about ascending the frequencies or traversing the frequencies in different ways. Could you explain a little bit about what you mean by these frequencies and
By ascension, even maybe going
yeah,
back to basics.
maybe kind of stepping back and going like, what is ascension? What are the frequencies? And then to give people an understanding of like how these actually affect their physical reality, their physical health,
Well,
like how these things blend together.
Well, I'll start at the end first and then go back and then come back to it.
Sounds good.
What we've experienced with COVID, what we might experience with this sudden random appearance of monkeypox in areas which isn't Afro-Caribbean is all part of our frequential level. And detoxing isn't all about eating foods that are pure, that haven't been messed with, like GMO, that sort of stuff, or should we say foods that have been pre-processed, pre-packaged, preserved, all these things. It isn't about eating pure stuff. It's about purity of thought, purity of behavior, purity of actions as well. And so ascension, in essence, is our ability to think, behave, and act in a higher frequency way. And that means we don't enter into gossip, we don't enter into materialistic thoughts, we don't enter into wanting status. We just interact with our circumstances and the individuals within our circumstances within the environment in a way which is non-karmic. Now, karma is quite a big subject. It's not just about, well, if I hit you, you've got to hit me, and it's nullified. It's about how we interact with the physical, the gross physical, because karma is essentially an addiction to things that we experience, things we sense, things that we encounter, things that we think, our behaviors and actions. And it's all associated with being in the physical universe, not just the gross physical, but the rest of the frequencies associated with the physical as well. Because the physical universe is the only universe that needs 12 frequencies to create it. That's because they're all the lowest frequencies. And what we're experiencing right now is the gross physical, which needs 3 frequencies to create it. Scientific mankind says that this is the 3rd dimension. Well, that's just the 3 dimensions is basically wrong. 3 dimensions are a metric for volume, not the construct that creates this particular aspect of the physical universe, the lowest frequencies. So if you think of ascension, it's about working with ourselves to the point where we don't get stuck in the lowest frequencies, we don't get linked into it. We don't have to come back to detach ourselves, because when we get attached to the gross physical, that's a karmic link, and the karmic link can be with the desire to have certain sensory experiences again, certain levels of status, certain levels of beingness, certain levels of interaction with others, certain levels of health, certain levels of wealth, those sorts of things. The desire to experience these things, which are quite fundamental and low frequency. And so we can sort of navigate around not being addicted to these things, and we can also navigate around how we interact with others, so we don't create a karmic link with somebody. Like if we deride somebody or we gossip about somebody, again, you got a karmic link where you've done something you shouldn't do, really, because it's like it's a low frequency thought. I mean, talking about somebody in the background without involving them is actually, it's gossip, and that's the fastest way of gaming karma, because we all group together. We all want to be in communion. We're naturally in communion when we're in the higher frequencies, and we miss that communion. And so we want to enter into communion in any way we can do. And that's why we have people supporting football clubs or basketball or baseball clubs or any other sports, But the one sport that we engage in really freely and without any encouragement whatsoever is gossip. And that's the fastest way to gain karma. So that's a thought and a behavior associated with a low frequency modality of existence. And so if we have these links, that keeps us down. So if we think about what the frequencies are, and I'll very quickly go through the structure of the multiverse just to help people understand. The multiverse is a function of part of the structure of the source, our creator, our God. it's the first three parts of it. It keeps the fourth part to itself because there's other parts above that which are part of the origin. So it's a bit like a cell, or a bit like it's going further. It's a bit like a quark is part of the structure associated with electrons, protons, neutrons, which is part of the structure of an atom. It's a bit like that. There's always something bigger that's there, although the end of the bigness is the origin. Or should say the origin's understanding of self is the end of the bigness. So the multiverse is created through three levels of structure: full dimension, subdimensional components, and frequency. And they all behave in the same way apart from the first one. So I'll leave the first one out of the way because it deals with the lowest frequencies. So the full dimension number 2 to number 12, they've all got the same structure, they all behave in the same way, but each of the components increases in finitude and therefore the ability to hold content, a bit like a memory stick. You know, in the old days, you could barely get a couple of kilobytes on a 12-inch floppy disk, but now you can get a terabyte on a little SD card to put in your phone. You know, it's the same sort of, it's smaller space, but you've got more capacity. And that's what happens in these frequency levels. So each full dimension splits out into 3 subdimensional components. And each of those subdimensional components further splits out again into 12 frequency levels or frequency bands. And they're the building blocks. Each of those frequency levels and frequency bands has the capability of and does support the possibility of self-contained, simultaneous, not parallel universes is something else, universal environment in its own right. So we have 11 times 3 times 12, which is 396 frequencies and therefore 396 universes. But the first full dimension is a rare situation because it only holds the lowest frequencies. So although it splits out again into 3 subdimensional components, they compress back into a composite subdimensional component because they can't separate because the frequencies are too low. So therefore, only 12 frequencies are created. So all those 12 frequencies that are created are required to create a universe because there's not enough finitude in any of them, except when they're all together. So it's like needing 12 floppy disks to hold what was the old Microsoft Word, remember the smaller floppy disks. So it's like having 12 memory sticks to hold the content associated with the universe, whereas you only need 1 for later. Or later you can put 12 universes in a memory stick. It's that sort of thought process. You know, space is a material. It's what's in there. It's the finitude associated with the counts. So we have another 12 frequencies equaling 408 frequencies, but only 1 additional universe. We've got 397 universes. And so part of what we are is we have to experience each of the possibilities presented to us within each of these universes to evolve, and therefore then reconnect with the much greater part of us, what I'm told to call the true energetic self. We sometimes call it the oversoul, we sometimes call it the higher self, we sometimes call it the Godhead from Hindu text. It's all the same thing. And then when we recommune with that, when we've finished working with these different levels on its behalf, then that part recommunes with source. And then when everything else, every other level of sentience or soul has done the same thing, and recommune with its higher self, in totality, all those different billions upon billions upon billions of souls, recommune with the source, then another evolutionary level starts. But coming back down to here again, with the detoxing side, to enable us to do that, we need to move beyond the need to incarnate. And so we need to purify ourselves in our thoughts, behaviors, and actions so that we can ascend the frequencies whilst we're incarnate. And what that means is if we can purify our thoughts, behaviors, and actions to the point where we don't incur any karma, any links, any desires, any addictions, any thought processes that are low frequency, we can come here, navigate around our incarnation, accrue 0 karma, but we can accrue dharma, which is positive karma, if you want to call it that. And then we can start to rise up the frequencies, and in doing so, we gain access to higher functions above that which we can do, of the 5 senses that we currently got. So we start to have telepathy, we start to have creativity, we start to have astral traveling more often, we start to have the ability to teleport, all these things. But that's like in the 4th frequency level, which is the lower astral. So unless we detox or cleanse how we exist here, we have to keep coming back to have another go. And that also that that doesn't just include detaching from people we've had a problem with or they've had a problem with us in past lives. It's detaching with us in our past lives, and it's detaching from our addictions to wanting to come back into the physical as well. And the Earth is quite a rare body, because it's the only location where we've got individualized free will in this particular frequency set. So it's quite a strong evolutionary accelerant to come here. Although we do incarnate in other locations within the physical universe, different galaxies, different planets within those galaxies, etc., and the different frequencies as well.
I love the way you said detoxify or cleanse how we live. I think that gives everybody lots of material as far as where are we able to start. Where are we clinging? Where are our addictions around things? One thing you mentioned in this book, one of the earlier ones, this is a great book, by the way. So everything Guy's talking about, this literally has like short little sections where you will literally get almost like a meditation for the day or for the week to basically contemplate and then integrate into your life. So I really love the way that's set up. It's very like doable, contemplative steps to work with. One thing though I was curious about is one of the lessons in there says, beware of the digital reality. And I find this so fascinating because it feels like what's going on in the planet is moving more and more to a digital reality, yet that's also a way of getting hooked into the physical universe. So how do you engage in the modern world as it is, that does rely so much on technology, but then at the same point not accruing karma because of that interrelationship? Is it just a feeling of attachment to it, or what's your perspective on that? How do we be in the world but not completely of the world at the same time?
We have to recognize that when we start to get overcome with desires that are clouding our vision, clouding our thought process, that we're becoming addicted. So when we start to ignore things, ignore our own checks and stop points where we should stop and look and understand and start again, for instance, that's when we start to get addicted. So for instance, the digital reality, I mean, computers are tools. I mean, we have to do a lot of work on computers these days, but they're just a tool. If you're just using it as a tool, that's fine. If you are just hooked on games, if you're hooked on social media, if you're hooked on some of these virtual realities environments that have got you in cyberspace, for instance, then that's again a physical link. So that's again karmic. So if we think about things as being a necessary tool, like a car is a necessary tool to move around the planet, an airplane is, a train is, a shop is a necessary tool to provide sustenance for ourselves. If you're going to go to the store and buy groceries or buy clothes to keep us warm, that's a necessary tool. If we think of it as a necessary tool to allow ourselves to navigate around this incarnation, then you won't get addicted. There's some wonderful stories that Paramahansa Yogananda gave, where he said that just because you're not rich, it doesn't mean you're more spiritual, more holy, because a king that has got billions of dollars can be a more spiritual individual than somebody who's aspiring to be a yogi, because of the way they understand the material world and how to work with it. And so there's stories where a king can realize that it's all transient. Well, it is all transient, isn't it? There's an old saying, there's no pockets in shrouds. When you finish this incarnation, it doesn't matter how many billions you've got, you can't take it into the energetic because it's just part of this environment. So it's really about understanding that if you're a king and you're a ruler and you're ruling benevolently and you have lots of money, that money's being used in the right way to help the individuals who are your subjects. And if you think of it in that way, then you can be an advanced yogi or advanced spiritual individual, but you can still be probably the richest man in the world. or richest lady in the world, for instance. So it's about understanding what's in and around your environment, and recognizing that what you've got is the ability to use the tools around you to enable your navigation through this incarnation in a seamless way. In the UK, last week, there was a couple who won 184 million pounds. So they've gone from rags to riches instantaneously. And they had the opportunity of being incognito with their winnings, but they said we didn't want to lie to our friends. They got it. Now, what they're going to do with it? They said they were going to basically share it out. Well, my thought process would be, you can do a lot of good with that money, as long as you create a trust or something, and do a lot of good with it. And again, Yogananda said that a yogi could be quantified as being, if he won $18 million and gave 17 million away and kept $1 million for himself, that's the mark of a yogi, because you've got to survive still, and it might be that you can't work normally because of the impact of it, but you can still have enough to last out the rest of your life. But you can give the rest away and do good things with it. Like give children education in different locations around the world. Create a way to irrigate fields where there's barren land. You could do all of these things, which would be very, very, very good. But not let it control you. That's the most important thing. And that again is detoxing, isn't it? Or cleansing the self. It's recognizing that what you've got is a tool, not a level of status that is going to put you on a pedestal. It's simply a tool that you can use to navigate around your environment in this particular incarnation.
It's such an important one, Guy, because it totally ties back into, we really need to have this constant sort of honest dialogue with ourselves, as far as where are we and why are we actually doing the things we're doing. And until we really have that clarity around our motivation behind things, we can trick ourselves so easily, right? And so it's almost like that's the beginning part, is to when we're asking the question, who are we asking the questions to? Are we asking the conditioned self, or are we asking sort of the true self that really wants us to evolve and grow and learn and all these things?
Very, very quickly, if you just spend a couple of seconds on food, if you look back at actors or anybody, or photographs of people back in the 1960s and 70s, we were all dead skinny, weren't we? Some of us still are. Some of us put a few pounds on because of age, etc., etc. But basically, most individuals were skinny. These days, most individuals are getting close to being obese. Now, why is that? They're not eating food that is preserved. All the food's pre-packed, pre-cooked in a box. You just got to put it into a microwave. So go into places like Walmart, Asda in the UK, all the other JC Penney's, all the Asda, Sainsbury's, all the big sort of supermarkets are selling food cheaply, pre-prepared, preserved. That level of preservation means that it's there. You can stay on the shelves for a long time. But the problem is, it's not pure food. It's not raw vegetables. It's not, it's not, for instance, if you've had an animal, you've looked after it, you farmed that animal, and you've looked after it, and it's given you milk or butter, whatever, and it's died naturally, and then you eat the animal as an old animal that's died naturally. That's the way to eat meat. You've lived with it, you've looked after it, it's had a long life, and it's died naturally. The medieval times call it eating mutton for sheep. So that's the way it should be. It's clean, it's pure. It's not had stress in its life, so it's not been slaughtered in a stressful way. The vegetables aren't preserved. We're eating, we're eating them without any chemicals to stop the fungicides and stuff. The body absorbs it properly. deals with it properly, voids it properly. When we have these pre-packed preserved foods, the body absorbs it quickly because it's attractive to it, but it can't use it. So basically, the body only uses the pure stuff to animate it. The other stuff stays on as fat and doesn't go anywhere, because the body can only use the pure stuff to animate it. It's only when it's really got no choice, because there is no pure stuff, that it starts to very gently, but very difficult, has a very difficult process of starting to try to use this preserved fat as a fuel for animating the body. So that's why people are getting fat, because they're eating food which is not really food, basically. So again, if they cleanse themselves by eating pure, by going to the grocers, buying, they call it organic these days, but organic just means it grows in the ground. Buying pure, buying food that's been just grown naturally without preservatives, without fungicides, by animals that have lived a long life and died naturally, their bodies would not increase in size, because the body would be able to use the energy properly.
Yeah, back in the day, I remember doing a course with Dr. Nigel Plummer, who is one of the founders of what's now termed functional medicine. And he said when it came to plants, eat plants that have been stressed, meaning that they have not been sprayed with pesticides or insecticides. They're not GMO'd. They're natural plants that have had to survive the elements on their own, because that's what raises a lot of the really bioactive ingredients that are helpful for sustaining health. And he said, eat animals that are not stressed, meaning exactly what you've talked about. I think eating a whole food diet in that way is across the board, when everybody's trying to figure out what kind of best diet practices to do, that's probably your first starting point. And then from there, you can always tailor it down a little bit more.
When I was diving into the Origin Speaks book, you had described the 6 ways of progression, which I found really fascinating, and it's practical ways to live our lives and ascend the frequencies. And some of them were actually really surprising for us as we were reviewing them. But the description that you gave of each and every one of them was just a paragraph, like very succinct. And I'm wondering if we can quickly touch on those, if you don't mind, and just advice.
Yeah. Well, you'll have to go through them, because that book's a long time ago, but I'm sure we can.
I've got them down here, Guy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've got them down here, and I thought maybe you could just do a quick touch on for each one to sort of finish up, because it also ties right back with what we talked about with karma. It ties into a practical way for people to start to incorporate aspects of what we're talking about into their life kind of right now.
We actually wanted to print these out and have them up on our fridge. And I thought, what great education would this be, even if we taught this at schools when children are
right from early on.
Okay. Well, what I suggest you do is if you read out each one, and I'll do my best to elaborate, because
In your words, would you be able to even describe what 6 ways of progression is, and why it's relevant, and how it could be helpful?
It provides a funnel of understanding of self and the environment, and how to integrate with the environment and ourselves and those around us, really, and also how to create through good example, how others can learn from you, not by rote, you should do this, you should do that, but by seeing how somebody benefits from working in these ways, to then see, well, if that works for them, I'll do it as well. And so as we work through different ways, like with avoiding karma, for instance, ways which show that we are not only progressing, but we're benefiting from it in some way. And that benefit might actually be materialistic as well, because there needs to be something that gives us motivation, for what's a better word. If people could see people are doing self-work in a way which is benefiting them, and that there's evidence that they could potentially do it themselves, and they have a go, then you start to get this fractalization where, one person shows two people, and then those two people show two or three people, and you start this fractalization. That's the start of the introduction of the process that will allow us to be a great civilization, not just a technological civilization, not just one that's one above the caveman because we've got computers. It's understanding and working with nature to the point where we can start to create. And this is what these six ways create the opportunity for, giving us the chance to become a truly great civilization. When we become a truly great civilization, we will then stand the chance of being able to interact with other civilizations in the other frequencies associated with the physical universe.
Mm-hmm. Whenever I hear that, Guy, and I mean, I grew up watching Star Trek, and I really liked Star Trek. And one of the things that happened in Star Trek, which I thought was really fascinating, and it just is a neat memory to kind of come back to, but it was like the idea that once Earth had reached a certain level of growth and awareness, which tied in very much with a lot of the things that you're talking about. There's a certain level of sort of progression that they made. Then they were able to actually then interact with other civilizations, right? From that concept, it was literally like different races and whatnot. But it just makes sense to me that at a certain point, that if we keep progressing in line with what you're talking about here, our world's going to open up in bigger ways that maybe we can't quite fathom at the moment.
Well, one of the benefits is we increase our frequency. As we increase our frequency, we increase our communicative bandwidth with our higher self, true energetic self. And of course, we start to understand more about the environments, because we start to get more clairsentience, because everything is there. The whole universe is a vast, instantly accessible library of everything. Let's think of it that way. And so when we start to work in a self-governed but progressive way, we will start to see that actually there is lots of entities here that we can't see. Because as we move up the frequencies, we start to see other things that are manifest on the earth of a higher frequency, but are imperceptible to us because our five senses are based upon the gross physical, not the physical associated with the fourth frequency level, for example. So there are lots of entities here already, but we just can't see them. We can't smell them, we can't touch them, we can't taste them. But when we start to move up the frequencies, you start to see things at the corner of your eye. You start to sense things. You start to feel that you're being watched. And then you go up to the next level, you start to see them properly. Overlaid with your physical vision, that which comes through the spiritual third eye. So it's not about technology. We've reached the right level because we've got warp drive. It's about being mature.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we're petulant school children. We're about 3 years old. We kick and scream and gnash our teeth, And by the way, there's a button over there that can launch a nuclear bomb. And we're constantly told not to push that button, but we still want to. Yeah. So we get annoyed that we can't do what we want to do, and that's where the human race is right now. We're a petulant 3-year-old.
Well, this
But
is a
some
good
of us
time,
aren't.
to talk about 6 ways of progression then.
So the first one that you talked about was stature.
Yeah. Well, stature is really about presence, isn't it? It's about understanding what we are in our beingness and recognizing that, in essence, we need to be responsible for who we are, what we do, and how we do it, and how we manipulate our environment as a function of that. So it's that stature. It's not wisdom as such. It's sort of beyond wisdom. It's like power and wisdom together, stature.
And there's definitely a presence associated with that when you're in contact with people that hold a certain stature. You just, they hold this presence about them that is undeniable.
It can be classified as charisma.
Yeah.
And next is confidence.
Confidence is really not a case of being overconfident. It's confident in knowing that what you're doing is the right thing. You can be confident and do the wrong thing, but it's about recognizing that if we do this, we know that we're going to ascend the frequencies. We know that we're going to better ourselves, because that's the real currency, not being rich or having lots of houses or cars or whatever. It's about evolution. And so confidence is about knowing that certain ways of living give you the opportunity to ascend the frequencies, and using those, and knowing that it's a long road. We don't get anything. Sometimes when we start these things, we might get a flash. That flash is the motivator. It's given to us by source or by our true energetic self. We then have to create the devotion behind the intention, so that flash comes whenever we want it, not just after 30 hours of meditation. We might get 2 seconds of enlightenment, and then they go back to being unenlightened. It's about knowing that the techniques work, but it might take a lifetime, and sometimes it can take 5 years or even 5 months. But it's knowing. Yeah.
All right. The third one is creativity.
Yeah, I mean, creativity is a high function. It is a high function, and creativity is all about creating the condition that benefits not just yourself but others as well. So when we create something, whether it's work of art, or whether it's a tool, or it's a house, or it's an environment, we have to understand that what we're creating has to be of benefit, not just of personal desire to satisfy an ego. And so the creativity is ensuring that whatever we do create is of benefit to others before we create it for the possibility of our own benefit.
And next is evolution.
Well, there's different types of evolution, by the way, and that's in one of the Beyond the Source books, which I found a bit interesting. But evolution is a function of our personal progression. Now, the progression is beyond evolution, and I'm hoping to get a more complicated or more in-depth description of what that means in the book I'm about to start. But evolution is really a function of experience, learning, and therefore evolving based upon working with the knowledge that we've got and we've experienced in a way which is beneficial to not just us but to all around us, and that we learn our lessons once and not go down the same path because we've made a mistake or we don't believe what we've experienced. We evolve, we progress, we grow in stature in terms of love, wisdom, and power. That's the triangle. And once you've got all those in equal levels of content, so to speak, then you start to evolve. You get this you start to evolve in all sorts. Your stature increases, your presence increases, your confidence increases in the right way, because confidence can be confused with ego as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. The fifth one is service.
Well, that is probably one of the things that is a fundamental function of our ability to evolve. Service is about helping others and helping the environment to progress, and also in doing that you're of service to yourself. Now, that doesn't mean you've got to go down the road and help every old lady across the road whenever you see one. It's basically being of service when it's necessary, when it's required. And forcing one's service upon somebody is a negative as well. We have to be there when it's required. So, for example, if you see somebody who really is destitute on the street, for example, not just somebody who's putting old clothes on and going out there and it's their career. If you feel that there's somebody who needs help, how do they need help? A good example would be a number of years ago, we were walking through Birmingham town centre in the UK, And it was quite late at night. I think we'd been to a concert or something, my late wife and I. And this girl came up to us and she said, "Oh, can you spare some money? I'll need to get the train back to such and better Leicester." And she wanted an amount of money. And I said, "Well, I won't give you the money, but I'll buy the train ticket for you." Now that's service. Giving the money would have been a help, but what was the money for really? If she was really in trouble, then £10 may not have bought the ticket. So we went back to the train station and bought the ticket. And then she actually did want the train, as it happened. I don't know whether she'd lost a purse or something, but she was so delighted to bought the ticket. That was service, because at the end of the day, you've done the right thing. She's provided the transport for the lady to get back home. Whereas just giving the money, she may have needed extra money. She probably could got a ticket to go halfway, for instance. That's service. It's helping at the right level, at the right time, when it's required.
And I think you mentioned in your book too, one thing to be aware of is whether or not you're doing service with the idea that it's going to help you with your progression. So there's a bit of a motivation for, like a self-motivation to help others.
Greed. Bit of sort of self-greeding, that sort of thing. That's we've got to be careful. The ego sneaks in the back door sometimes. I've seen a number of individuals who are subservient and provide service because their prime motivational idea is that in doing so they'll evolve. But actually, that's not the case, because it's not the right way to do it. You can be dedicated to doing things when you need to, but being overly subservient is creating an ego in a different way.
And the last one, benevolence.
Well, benevolence is also a function of service, isn't it, really? So all these things linking together. And benevolence is not just putting yourself in a pedestal. For example, if you go to India and you're walking through a poor area, we tend to create a bubble around ourselves, don't we? This is happening. It's somebody else's incarnation or life. This is not my life, but I'm here visiting. I'm a tourist. So benevolence is about providing assistance, again, when it's required. And being benevolent, a lot of people are being benevolent right now to people who are refugees from the Ukraine. So helping on a fundamental level is benevolence. It's a way of being. It's recognizing that just because that person over there that's living in squalor is not as lucky as you, that they're not actually the same as you. Everybody is equal. Everybody is the same. Everybody is a individualized unit of sentience and energy from their true energetic self, Godhead, Oversoul, which is also an individualization of sentience and energy from Source or God. So when you start to realize that we're all one, and we're all one with God, then you realize that you can help people all the time, because they're actually just you. But a different function of you, because you are part of Source and they're part of Source. So if we're all part of Source, then it's us, isn't it? It's like all the atoms in your body. They're all part of this body, aren't they? So recognizing that means that you become benevolent to the individuals who you interact with. So you don't just ignore a beggar on the street. You might chat to them, for instance. That's benevolence, isn't it? That's sort of interacting with them. That's not pushing them away. You might give them some money to help them, but you might actually buy a sandwich for them instead. That's benevolence. It's recognizing their worth. That's benevolence. The times there's so many people on the street who've made a mistake in their incarnation. Maybe it's not a mistake. Maybe it's what they want to experience. But if everybody who got a a good household took one person on board who was struggling, nobody in the world would struggle. And that again would be the function of an advanced civilization. So benevolence is a building block towards being advanced civilization.
That's beautiful, Guy.
I'm looking forward to us all doing it.
You know, we were just talking to a friend yesterday, and she was telling us about a lady that she met that recently had come out here and had actually taken in stray dogs from all over into her house and had about 30 stray dogs in her house looking after them. I mean, and it actually ties very much into this feeling of benevolence, like with very selfless service in many ways, helping to try and find owners for the dogs and stuff. But I love that we're even seeing sparks of that in different places. That's important.
I mean, I go to Crete quite a lot, and there's a lady I know a couple of ladies, families actually, who are looking after animals there, and getting them seen by the vets and neutering them so that there's not a population explosion, but also rehoming them in different locations in the world. And but I can't be there to help out, but I support when I can do in a financial way. So these animals have a chance of being with a loving family.
Thank you so much, Guy, for this conversation. I feel like it's so important at this time when during the midst of COVID, which we might even ask you more about from your perspective, how you see things maybe at a future time, because I know
a bit of a what's the word for it? A lead into that for next time, maybe.
Sure.
If we don't move back up the frequencies, because we were moving up the frequencies, we dropped down again because our progression is like a sawtooth profile, but some of it are big sawtooth profiles, but the average is still generally up. If we don't progress and ascend the frequencies by changing our thoughts, behaviors, and actions, we'll still get ill because our frequencies are lower, and therefore things that are smaller, virus, attach themselves to us. When we're high frequency, we don't get ill because we're above the frequencies associated with things like viruses and disease.
This is when
That's a good subject for next time.
I think that's so important, Guy. And I mean, this is why we even talk about this concept of detoxifying, not just the physical. You've got to look at these other layers, because as we've talked about it, it's really a top-down model. It's like the things that are in more of the abstract affect the more concrete. So exactly like Guy's talking about, if you are working with stuff up here, you are creating a certain set of resilience within yourself to interact with the world in a very different way. So Guy, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that conversation. And for people that would like to learn more about the work you're doing, courses coming up, even individually seeing you for consultation, where can we send people?
www.beyondthesource.org. It's all there. It's a bit of a meandering website right now, but it probably needs a bit of a spring clean, but it's everything's there.
Wonderful. Those links will be in the show notes. And Guy, what a pleasure. We look forward to chatting with you again in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you asking me to come and talk with you all and share some of the knowledge.